Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay, let's call the March 17, 2021 meeting of the Hinsdale Zoning Board of Appeals to order. Chris, roll call, please.
Sure. Member Moberly?
No, Gary.
Gary.
He's muted. I think he's.
You muted, Gary. There's Keith. Keith.
Well, I'll move on. I'll go back to Gary. Member Alicia?
Yes.
Member Giltner?
Yes.
Member Murphy?
Here.
Member Lee?
Yes.
Member Podliska?
Here.
Chairman Neiman?
Here.
Gary Moberly? Are you with us? You're on mute if you are.
Gary, you got on mute.
There you go.
You should be able to see me. I bought a new camera and everything. I have no idea why it's not working.
Well, here we go. Maybe it'll take care of itself while we're going.
So before we get to the agenda items, I have a brief COVID notice to read. Due to the ongoing public health emergency and consistent with the governor's most recent emergency declaration, various executive orders entered by the governor and the recent amendments made to the Open Meetings Act in Public Act 101-640, the village president has determined that an in-person hearing is not practical or prudent at this time, and this meeting will therefore be conducted electronically. Public comment is permitted during the public hearing, during that portion of the hearing. I will ask any people wishing to make public comment to identify themselves before speaking. I'll ask that you spell your last name and state your address. First matter on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of our February 17, 2021 meeting. Earlier today, Chris had circulated some corrections to those minutes. Does anyone have any additional corrections? Okay, hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the February 17, 2021 minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Moberly?
Yes.
Member Alicia?
Yes.
Member Giltner?
Yes.
Member Murphy?
Yes.
Member Lee?
Yes.
Member Podliska?
Yes.
Chairman Neiman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next matter on our agenda is the approval of final decisions and findings of fact. The first one is in case V-07-20, 425 and 417 Elm Street. In addition to the edits that Chris circulated earlier today, does anyone have any additional edits to that final decision and findings of fact? Do I hear a motion?
So moved. Second.
Chris, roll call, please.
Member Moberly?
Yes.
Member Alicia?
Yes.
Member Giltner?
Yes.
Member Murphy?
Yes.
Member Lee?
Yes.
Member Podliska?
Yes.
Chairman Neiman?
Yes. Next matter up for approval of a final decision and findings of fact is in case V-01-21, 428 East 55th Street. Does anyone have any additional edits to that final decision and fact finding? Do I hear a motion?
So moved. Second.
Chris, roll call, please.
Member Moberly?
Yes.
Member Alicia?
Yes.
Member Giltner?
Yes.
Member Murphy?
Yes.
Member Lee?
Yes.
Member Podliska?
Yes.
Chairman Neiman?
Yes. Next matter up for approval of the final decision is in case V-02-21, 33 South Garfield Street. Anyone have any additional edits to that final decision?
Nope.
Hearing none, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Moberly,
Yes.
Member Alicia,
Yes.
Member Giltner,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Yes.
Member Lee,
Yes.
Member Podliska,
Yes.
Chairman Neiman.
Yes. Last matter up for approval of the findings of fact is in case V-02-2133 South Garfield Avenue. Does anyone have any additional edits to those findings of fact? Do I hear a motion?
So moved. Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Moberly,
Yes.
Member Alicia,
Yes.
Member Giltner,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Yes.
Member Lee,
Yes.
Member Podliska,
Yes.
Chairman Neiman.
Yes. Next matter on our agenda this evening is the receipt of appearances for anyone who is planning on addressing the board either on a matter of general interest or on one of the pre-hearings or on the final hearing this evening. If you could all raise your right hand, and Kathy, if you could administer the oath, please.
Right hands. You and each of you do solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Next matter on our agenda is a receipt of requests, motions, pleadings, or requests to make public comment of a general nature. Is there anyone attending this evening's meeting that is here to address the board on any matter other than the matters up for pre-hearing and public hearing? Hearing none. Next matter on our agenda is the case that is up for pre-hearing and agenda setting, case V-04-21, 120 East 5th Street. Whoever is the applicant here, good evening. If you could state your name for the record, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Zoning Board of Appeals. My name is Kate Duncan. I am an attorney with offices located at 71 South Wacker Drive in Chicago. I'm appearing this evening on behalf of the applicants Tina and Peter Veros, who are also joining us via Zoom. Maybe give a little wave there. I think you can all see them. We are here for a proposed application before you this evening for a pre-hearing for a property located at 120 East 5th Street in Hinsdale. Mr. and Mrs. Veros are the owners of this property, and they have recently constructed a new single home on the property. And specifically, Mr. and Mrs. Veros are here seeking variation.
Whoops. Ms. Duncan, your audio is going out.
Yard. The subject property at 120 East 5th Street is actually a through. I'm so sorry. I was fearing this. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I changed my internet connection. I was hoping. Okay. Sorry.
That's much better. No, it's
great.
happened to all of us 1,000 times in the last year. It's not a problem.
Okay, the subject property is a through lot with its primary front yard facing 5th Street and its secondary front yard facing 6th Street. The proposed home that Mr. and Mrs. Veros built was all built in accordance with the existing zoning district, and it met all of the requirements of the district, including all setback, height, lot coverage, and FAR requirements, and including facing the primary front yard along 5th Street. So the application before you tonight is related to the construction of a 6-foot tall fence along 6th Street that will be constructed of solid cedar. The main issue facing this property and the issue that's triggering the requirement for the variations is the through lot nature of the property, which creates 2 front yards considering the zoning code and no rear yard. And so because there are 2 front yards and because Mr. and Mrs. Veros' secondary front yard actually functions as their rear yard, they are seeking the following variations. The first is a variation from section 9-12-3E1A, which restricts the height of the fence, the height of a fence in a front yard to 24 inches feet, depending on the solid nature of the fence. And Mr. and Mrs. Veros, as I mentioned, are proposing a solid cedar fence with a height of 6 feet as a solid fence with a height of 24 inches. And the second variation is from section 9-12-3H3, which restricts a solid fence to 24 inches in any front yard. So present this evening, obviously, are Mr. and Mrs. Veros. And Peter, will you unmute yourself for me for a second?
Sure.
Thanks. Peter, can you tell the board just a little bit, just introduce yourselves and tell the board a little bit about why you have the need for the fence?
Sure. Peter Barros, my wife, Tina. We have, so just from a high level, there are, I guess, probably 3 main reasons. First and foremost is the security and safety of for our kids mainly. We have 3 young children, a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 16-month-old. So that's number 1. And then number 2 is there's some privacy concerns. And then third, I think it's just from an aesthetic standpoint, the continuity between the portions of the cedar fence and then the aluminum fence. We believe aesthetically it'll look better for us and for those looking at our fence.
Okay, can you describe the materials, Peter? Just tell them a little bit about the materials of the fence that you're proposing to construct.
Sure. So the proposed fence would be a 6-foot cedar fence that would match the existing 6-foot cedar fence that pretty much extends from our home to wherever I believe it's 30 feet from 6th Street. And then, yeah, so the rest of our fences is 6-foot cedar fence. We would just match that.
Okay. And you have 6-foot cedar fences in both of your side yards. Is that correct, Peter?
Correct.
Okay. And can you describe the landscaping for the board just a little bit? Tell them about the landscaping that you've done along 6th Street.
Sure. So after calling around to several nurseries, we were able to find mature, I believe they're called yews, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they're 6 to 7 foot yews that pretty much extend the full lot line on 6th Street. And we've packed them as densely as possible to create a solid hedge along the 6th Street fence line.
And we were told that these yews, they're 7 feet, they will get to 15 feet and create a solid hedge. So the existing fence won't be visible at all.
Okay. And Peter and Tina, can you just tell them a little bit about the character of that side of the block on 6th Street?
Sure. I'll jump in first. Tina may add some additional information. But our neighbor to the east also has, actually neighbor to the east and the west both have rear lots on 6th Street. In particular, our neighbor to the east has a similar through lot with a full solid 6-foot cedar fence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So Mr. Chairman and members of the Zoning Board of Appeals, I realize that this is just a pre-hearing tonight, and we understand that we'll be back for a full public hearing on this matter, but we did just want to give you an overview of the proposal. We do believe that we can demonstrate that the proposed project meets all the criteria for granting the variation, and we are happy to be here tonight to answer any questions you have in advance of the public hearing. So please let us know how we can answer your questions.
If I can jump in here, your house is beautiful. I drove by it today, so congratulations on that. So exactly where would this fence go? Because it looks like you've got really nice evergreens, and they will get a lot bigger. And there seems to be a metal fence of some sort right behind those. Where will this particular fence be exactly? Will it be behind that, or will it replace the metal fence? Or what?
It would replace the metal fence.
Okay. Will you be able to fit it there?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That was my key question, is where would it go?
Yeah.
Do any of the other board members have any questions this evening for Mr. and Mrs. Veros or Ms. Duncan.
Do you know whether your neighbors, to the east, they've got that fence there already? Did they get a variance the way you've requested, or what's the basis upon which they were able to put that fence up? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that, whether they had to seek a variation or not. I'm not sure of the answer to that.
Okay. It looks like what you plan on doing is your fence would basically be in the same line of sight with that fence, right? The same
Correct.
from the street? Okay. Okay.
I would just make sure your neighbors are all on board, because kind of in theory, you're disrupting the sight line of the street. So just make sure, especially the people to the west of you may have a little bit of an issue, and the people across the street may have an issue. So just make sure there's no objections and that they're all on board with what you're doing here.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Well, the new fence will go right on the same place as the old one. The old one comes down and it goes in exactly the same place, or is it going to be moved one way or the other?
Exactly the same place.
Okay. And that one is now, that's a non-complying.
No,
No.
that one's in compliance. That one's a compliant fence. They installed that fence because they knew they needed to secure their yard to some extent. But that fence is my understanding, because of the open nature of it, my understanding is that it's compliant.
Also, it doesn't have to be 24 inches.
No, it's the solid fence that needs to be 24 inches in a
Oh, I
front
missed this.
yard. Yeah.
Oh, all right.
That's correct, right, Rob?
That's correct.
Okay. Rob, do you know if the neighbors got a variance to put that?
I actually just wrote myself a note to check that. I'll get back to you all on that. My hunch is it's a pre-code fence, but I'll look and see what we've got on it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, let me just make one other recommendation for next month. The application contains an explanation of why you believe you meet the criteria for the variance. I think next month you should be prepared to provide a fuller, more detailed explanation as to why you meet each of those criteria, rather than the relatively short explanation you provided in the application.
Okay.
We'd like you to go through each of the criteria for 30 seconds or so and explain to us why you meet each of the criteria, because that gives us a fuller argument and goes through the criteria in order, makes our jobs easier. Okay, look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you all
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next matter on our agenda is the public hearing in case V-03-21, 505 South County Line Road.
Good evening, Chairman Neiman and members of the board. My name is Robert O'Donnell and I represent Frederick Crable, trustee of the Frederick Crable Trust. Before I begin, may I ask if you can enable share screen so I can go through exhibits that we've prepared?
Certainly.
Thank you. I'll be testifying first, and following will be Suzanne German, the Director of Grants and Easements for Landmarks, Illinois. Suzanne will speak to the donation of a preservation easement for the home on the subject property. And then following Suzanne will be architect Dennis Parsons, who will speak to the areas for which the variance is sought and the impact that the preservation easement has on the ability to use the property in the event the variance were not granted. Specifically, we request a variance from the minimum rear yard setback for the property at 505 South County Line Road. Under section 3-110D3B, the minimum rear yard setback is 50 feet, and for a patio, the minimum rear yard setback is 10 feet. So with that, let me display first exhibit number 1, which depicts the subject property. And the subject property consists of 4 lots of record. They're designated from the north or the top of the exhibit 6, 7, 8, and 9. There are only 3 PIN numbers. We recently designated or reassigned a single PIN number for lots 7 and 8. One of the purposes for this request for a variance is that we are going to create and separate lots 6 and 9 from lot 7 and 8, where the current home sits. The Craybills will be donating to Landmarks Illinois a preservation easement over the structure that exists on lot 7 and 8. And specifically, that preservation easement will include the exterior on 3 elevations, the north, the west, and the south, and then also designated areas on the interior of the home. I think it's important to note that the donation by the Craybills is purely for preservation purposes. There is no tax consequence accompanying that donation. As part of that process, lots 6 and 9 will be separated in order to create single-family home lots, presumably code compliant. There is no immediate plan on the table for any structures, but ultimately the plan will be for lots 6 and 9 to be separated. I was asked at the pre-hearing to inform you as to whether or not there are any utilities on either of those 2 lots. There is no utility on lot 9. There is a gas line on lot 6, which we've located, we're aware of, and that will be addressed at the time of separation as appropriate. I will briefly mention, but not get into, we have previously requested and received from the village a zoning interpretation with respect to our ability to separate lots 6 and 9 as separate buildable lots. We've received that determination, and it's consistent with what I've represented the Craybills plan to be for those 2 lots.
37 seconds. It's in 3 minutes.
Okay.
You just want to listen and say what they're going to say.
To be specific about the requests, and let me next show you what we've marked as exhibit number 2. And exhibit number 2, we can see that the location of the structure and attendant structures on lots 7 and 8. The garage is where we've depicted it, outlined in red, and we can see where that 50-foot setback line exists in relation to the garage. We've also shown the 10-foot setback, which is applicable to the patio structure. I'll move back and forth, but let me show you the garage as it actually exists on the property. This is exhibit number 3. Exhibit number 3 shows from north looking south the existing garage. It is an attached garage. There is living space above that garage, and that garage sits 21 feet off of that east property line. So the variance that would be requested for the garage is a 29-foot variance, as shown here on exhibit number 2. The second variance, also from that rear yard setback, applies to the patio. If I can show you, exhibit 4 is a photograph of that patio structure, and the specific area, maybe I'll see if I can enlarge it, but that specific measurement of the patio structure being 1.5 feet off that east property line, we measured that 1.5 feet to that portion of the patio wall that sticks out. So in other words, we determined the need for the encroachment from the most encroaching portion of that patio wall. It's that element that we're pointing to right there. That's the 1.5 foot area. So the request for the variance is a variance of 8.5 feet from that rear yard setback. What we're looking at the patio, and you can see the patio stairs that lead down to the property that actually is on the 526 Woodside property, also owned by the Craybills. But if you look at exhibit number 5, these stairs are the construct of the stairs, if you will, is almost more of a landscape element. These are grass stairs. The risers to the stairs are brick. And we have submitted to the village, presumably for review by the village attorney, a statement a document that would be recorded against both properties meaning the subject property as well as the 526 Woodside property, which would, at the time of where ownership may differ, and I say ownership of the 526 Woodside property, that owner would have the right to require the owner of the subject property to remove those stairs and restore that landscaped area to the proper grade. And that document would also be recorded against the subject property, which would impose the obligation of the owner of that property to comply with that request, remove the stairs, and restore the grade of that area of the yard on the 526 property. So that removal would occur. The only point in pointing out the nature of the fact that that is in essence a landscape element is that removal would certainly not be a significant nor an expensive undertaking, and could be accomplished very quickly. This variance is unusual in the sense that we're asking for a variance not to build anything new or to change anything, but to allow that which has existed on the property for decades to remain, specifically the patio that exists, as well as the current attached garage. To next address the standards applicable to our request for a variance, the first standard is the standard that identifies and explains a unique physical condition. Here, I would suggest to you that the unique physical condition is the fact that as a result of separating lots 6 and 9, which is part of the process of donating a preservation easement, our side yard becomes our rear yard, and the existing garage thereby encroaches into that 50-foot rear yard setback. So we go from a conforming structure to a non-conforming structure by exercising the right to separate those two buildable lots, and hence we're left with a non-conforming elements on the existing property. I think it's also important to note that this unique physical condition that results is part of a process to preserve the existing historic structure under the auspices of Landmarks Illinois. And I think the third thing to point out about the uniqueness of the property is the fact that we have a front yard that once all this occurs, that is approximately 130 feet, which is more than 3 times what is the required front yard setback. Yet we have obviously a rear yard setback, which is limited as I've described. I would suggest that we've also satisfied the second standard, and that is that that which is occurring is not self-created. I think it's important to note that the garage is a pre-code structure. So this garage was built in the early 1980s. This is certainly not something that we're introducing currently that creates a nonconformity. The nonconformity is created as I've contained. So I do think that this is a standard that has been satisfied by this application and the circumstances that create it. The third standard, the denial of substantial rights standard, here, if a variance were not granted, the property owner would be confronted with the prospect of having to remove the existing patio area, which candidly would not impose that great a hardship. However, we would also be required to replace the existing attached garage with a new garage. Because of the historic preservation easement that will be created, in particular on that north elevation, we would not have the opportunity to replace the garage with a attached garage. We would be left with only the opportunity for a detached garage. And because of the restrictions that apply to detached garages, that detached garage would not be able to have a living element on the second floor as we currently enjoy. So I certainly think that there is a denial of a right commonly enjoyed by other property owners in the village in the event the variance is not granted. The fourth standard, that this is not merely a special privilege, is a standard that that we were requested to pay particular attention to tonight. And I think here the answer to this standard lies in the fact that the separation of lots 6 and 9 from the zoning lot do not require the variance be granted. We have the right to separate lots 6 and 9 into separate buildable lots. The need for the variance lies in our ability to retain and keep the existing attached garage. As I've just explained, absent the variance, what would be required is to demolish that portion of the structure and rebuild a detached garage. But the separation of lots 6 and 9 are going to occur. They're not dependent directly on the variance being granted. So, to address the specific point is this variance is not being requested in order to create an opportunity or is creating an opportunity to make money off of the sale of buildable lots within the village. I think that's buttressed. That conclusion is buttressed by the fact that the historic preservation donation that the property owner is going to do is unaccompanied by any request for favorable tax treatment. So profit motive is not what's driving these requests. What's really driving these requests is preservation. The fifth and sixth standards, whether we're accomplishing the purposes and achieving the purposes of the code and the plan, and whether or not we're consistent with the essential character of the area, I think is really answered. Both of those are answered by the fact that we're not changing anything. We're not adding any structures. We're not replacing any structures with any other elements. So nothing changes. So that which has existed on the property literally for decades will remain as is, and in fact will be enhanced by the preservation easement. We have also submitted the affidavit of Mr. Muniz, and the Muniz affidavit confirms that that particular property owner, and that property owner is at the 531 East 6th Street, that really abuts the property on the southeast. They not only are fully supportive of the request for variation, but do so cognizant of the fact that Lot 9, which they are adjacent to, will likely be developed in the future with another single-family home. So I certainly think that the fifth and sixth standards that are applicable to our request have been satisfied. Finally, whether or not another remedy exists, it really doesn't. because we're looking to keep what exists as opposed to add something that may have an alternative approach, but we're pursuing that which one may prefer. Here, we're simply looking for a variance to keep what exists in place. And with that, what I'd like to do is ask Suzanne German to speak to a little bit more specifically to the preservation easement that is currently in process.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne German from Landmarks, Illinois. And Landmarks, Illinois is a statewide nonprofit organization to advocate for historic preservation. And we are currently celebrating our 50th year. So we've been doing this for a long time. I've been with Landmarks, Illinois for 17 years. And my main position is managing our easement program. We currently hold about 540 easements throughout the state, mostly in the Chicagoland area. And an easement is a legal agreement between a property owner and an easement holding organization such as Landmarks, Illinois, that in that partnership, we agree to preserve that property in perpetuity. So with that donation, the ownership remains the same with the property owner, but we have an interest in it to ensure that it's preserved over time. The property would not be able to be demolished or altered without our permission. And in most cases, this is the only protection on these easement protected properties. It may be designated on the National Register or within a National Register district, which is an honorific designation. In most cases, they are not within a local landmark ordinance and protected by a local landmark ordinance. We do hold 2 other easements in Hinsdale as well. This property is specifically, as Mr. O'Donnell mentioned, Mr. Krehbiel is donating the easement purely for its preservation. The easement donations are, in some cases, eligible for an income tax deduction. And in this case, he's not seeking that deduction and is purely doing it for the preservation of the property. And this house was built in 1902 by an architect, Joseph Corson Llewellyn. And it looked significantly different when it was built then. It had 2 additional stories that were taken off in the 1940s. But in the 1920s, the owners at the time, Jack Peabody, hired David Adler, who is a prolific architect in Chicago, and mostly on the North Shore of Chicago, residential architect. And this is the only property that we of record that we know of that he worked on in the western suburbs. In the 1920s, he made alterations to it, changing it from, eliminating some of the Victorian era details of the front porches and some other details, and put on the classical elements that you see now. And I'm going to ask you to go to Exhibit 9, which is the west elevation, which is the front elevation. And you'll see the large portico that was put on by David Adler, as was this entry that you see in Exhibit 7 that's on the screen now with the on that front entry. And most significantly, he made changes to the interior of the house. On the first floor, he modified 4 rooms that are really his signature piece of this property. And those interior elements will also be protected by the easement. So what we're looking at protecting is this west elevation and the north elevation. We're still talking with Mr. Krehbiel about the details of whether the south elevation will be protected as well. But it's really the key elements that David Adler designed are the significant pieces. And one of the benefits of a preservation easement, I see it as a benefit, is that we monitor the properties annually. So an architect will come to the property every year, photograph it, meet with the owner if they want to, inspect it for any maintenance issues, ensure that there haven't been any changes without our permission. And we also see ourselves as a resource that, because we are viewing it and looking for those maintenance issues, we can call those to the owner's attention early on in the process. I can certainly answer any other questions you have about easements in general or specifically this easement. Thank you.
Dennis?
Hold on. Yep. I'm here.
You're on.
Okay. All right, let's, well, I think they've asked me to speak to you about the alternatives of this buildable area. Let's get that other, can I have that site plan showing the rear yard with the proposed garages?
Yes.
There we go. So if we were not successful in getting this variance, they've asked me to explain what kind of a detached garage might be able to be built on this property. So what this shaded area back here is the rear yard, the 50-foot rear yard. And it's a 60,000 square foot lot. So if you had the FAR, you could build a 6,000 square foot garage. We don't have the 6,000 square foot FAR. We have a 2,400 square foot FAR left for us, which is a garage that's 24 by 100. I could never in my wildest dreams imagine Fred Crayville ever building this structure back there. I think he's got too much respect for the village and everyone else involved. But this is what could be built, and it could be built within 2 feet of the property line, and it could be built anywhere in this shaded area. So this is just an example of, this is what the code allows, but I don't think we want to go there.
And so, Dennis, if I can ask you a question too, just to explain a bit more, when you say that it needs only, that detached garage requires only a 2-foot setback, is that by code?
Yes, that's the setback for an accessory structure to within 2 feet of the property line. In this case, we have a rear yard abutting a rear yard over here, and a rear yard abutting a rear yard over here, and in the same condition. So the setback is only 2 feet. If it were a rear yard abutting a side yard, you'd have to have a 6 foot six foot setback on either side. But even that would not hamper building a huge structure back there if that was the decision of the zoning board. So there's the solution, and this can only be 15 feet high at the mean roof height, which doesn't leave much of a, there's no way that building is going to be in context with this existing structure. The existing garage is delightfully attached to the house and was very tastefully done. And it's a substantial brick building. And it would just be a real shame not to be able to leave this house the way it is, just leave it alone. So, you can build an accessory garage, but I don't think Fred would ever do such a thing.
And so with that, Mr. Chairman, we're certainly available, the three of us, to answer any questions that any members of the board may have, but that concludes our presentation.
Hi, this is Gary. If I could ask a question for Suzanne, can these easements you spoke of, can they be withdrawn at some point, or can a future owner withdraw this easement? Or if we've had cases before, I guess with the historic preservation agreements, that somebody can back out of it down the road. So I was just wondering how tight this was.
Yeah, and it's a very good question. And it's one reason why we see preservation easements as our strongest tool. There are no politics involved in it at all. There is no deed
restriction.
Right. So that would really jeopardize our 501c3 status and our reputation with the IRS to do that. So of our 550, we've not dissolved an easement.
Any other questions from the board?
Can I ask a question for Rob McGinnis, Director? There. So Mr. O'Donnell made a statement. I just want someone to verify it for me. Not that I don't trust you, Mr. O'Donnell, but so today they can split off lots 6 and 9 without anyone's approval, and somebody can build a house there starting tomorrow or whenever I get the plans approved. Is that?
That's accurate.
I just want to
yes.
verify that statement.
Yep.
I'm not a lawyer. Okay, thank you.
And hey, Rob, so curious, what makes them legal non-conforming? What's the non-conforming part?
Well, there's actually, you get into the definition of legal non-conforming lot, and there's a three-pronged test that has to be passed in order to have a lot deemed a legal non-conforming lot, not just a non-conforming lot. And these particular lots have no permanent structures on them. There's no encroachment by the principal structure. They were platted, they're pre-code, and they never had any structures on them. As such, they're entitled to be developed under, I think it's 10104.
And they're 30,000 square foot lots, which is standard in R1.
So if you go to, I'm sorry, 10105. Got to find a new job. I'm starting to quote code. It's dangerous. So in the R1, in 10105, legal non-conforming lots of record, you actually only need 14,000 square foot. And on a corner, you need 80 foot of width and 125 foot of depth. So the standards are a little different when it comes to legal non-conforming lots of record, rather than like newly created lots under 3-110. That's where that 30,000 square foot lies. Does that help?
Yeah, but so the village would approve separating these lots, although we're going through a variance process right now, right? So indirectly,
so the lots already exist.
Right.
However, by virtue of spinning those two lots off, the orientation, these are really definitional issues, right? So right now, the front yard is technically on Woodside, but once you split off these corner lots, your front, the narrow dimension, ends up on county line, and as such, the east lot line becomes the rear. So there's nothing new built there. It exists today, but by virtue of the definitions of the yards changing, you end up needing relief. So barring the relief, arguably you'd have a difficult time securing permits to spin off those lots 7 and 9.
So this is Leslie. Rob, I have another question sort of related to what you were just describing. So if a single family home were built on lot 6, can you define the yards?
Sure. The front is on county line. The corner side is on Woodside. The rear is that east lot line that abuts the single family home that Mr. Kreibel currently owns. And the south lot line would be your interior lot line.
Thank you.
That doesn't mean that a house couldn't face Woodside. Certainly you could orient it any way you want, but with respect to the required yards, the code's pretty specific on how those are defined.
Any other questions from the board?
Yes, I have a question about the patio. Would it do violence to the preservation easement if that patio were to be moved back to the north-south line that's set by the east side of the garage? Am I making myself clear?
You are. The easement itself wouldn't protect any of the landscape features or that wall. It's the house itself. So the north elevation and west elevation of the house and interior features.
Okay. And would that be a doable thing to move that patio back? Anybody?
Well, is it doable? Literally, I'm certain anything is doable. But if we take a look at, and I'm going to put up actually a photograph that I showed at the pre-hearing. It is not one of the marked exhibits, but we'll call it Exhibit 12. If we look here, if we were to pull it back to accommodate the 10-foot setback, we would actually be into the area that's the drive court. I mean, it's really more the motor court that we're intruding upon. The patio itself, you can see the two large planting areas that exist. So I guess one of my points would be we would be destroying and removing an area that is cohesive and consistent with the current layout of the property, of the patio. Again, I don't know that removal accomplishes a whole lot, to be candid.
Well, it would bring it closer to compliance with the code is what it would do. And it doesn't look like it would interfere with being able to maneuver the cars in and out of the garage, right? This whole section of patio is added on extra to what's needed to maneuver the cars on the driveway. True?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, certainly there's enough area to maneuver the cars. What I'm not exactly certain of is I don't know where that 10 feet would stop. So I don't know if we would intrude upon the motor court area at all. Again,
so we wouldn't necessarily have to move it back for the full 10 feet. We can move it back though, and if we take it back to the line of the east wall of the garage, that may or may not be 10 feet from the lot line, but it would certainly pull it back so that we're not creating quite as much of a variance here as we would be required to do. Right now, we've got to give a variance of 8.5 feet out of the 10 feet that is required, right?
That's correct.
So if we move that patio back, we can at least do something here to accommodate the code a little bit better than asking for 8.5 feet to be taken off of the 10-foot requirement.
Well, Bob, can I add something here? The edge of these planters are 9 feet off the property line, so they're non-conforming by only 1 foot. And I'm not sure, so I think you're allowed to have landscaping features within 1 foot of the property line, if I'm not mistaken. So the only thing we would, by tearing out those planters, we're going to bring it to within, we're still in a non-conforming mode,
but only by a foot.
By a foot, but the planters really, are the planters not allowed? Aren't the planters landscaping and not patio? And I don't see why this is really a patio and why it's not considered driveway. And as such, driveways can go within 12 inches of the property. So I'm not sure how this area, this car area got labeled a patio.
And if I can, to speak to really to punctuate the point Dennis is making, is that one of the points that I know that was mentioned at the pre-hearing is that the design and the construct of that drive court, and particularly the area that actually we're calling it patio, that comes right up to that 1.5 feet from the rear yard, or what will become the rear yard, by all appearances and by designation, by all appearances, appears to be a parking space. In other words, it's a portion of the drive court, but for purposes of our request, it was identified to be a patio, and we adjusted our request for a variance accordingly. But I certainly think that one could also legitimately and appropriately consider that area as a portion of the drive or motor court.
Well, Rob, if we call it a driveway, does it need a variance at all?
Well, it's not a driveway by definition. I mean, I'd have an easier time defining it as a parking pad. Technically that parking pad could go as close as a foot off that rear, I believe.
Well, as a parking pad, it would conform. So I would hate to tear out a planter to make it to increase the parking area, I would think the planter is more desirable than pavement. So I really, this seems to be a more of a question of semantics, but of all the places there are to sit on this property, this is not any place you ever hang out on. The patio and the gardens are all to the south, and they're lovely. You would never, ever use this area to recreate in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I'm just looking at this, thinking we could very, very closely comply with the setback requirements of the code by simply moving that that planter area, removing that, and now we're back. I think you said 9 feet from the lot line, right? So we would be in virtual compliance with the code at that point.
I have a similar concern as John, and my question has to do with the actual structure itself. Can you switch back to the photo that has it's like a wall? It looks like a 3-4 foot wall.
Sure.
That view. Yeah. So, and tell me exactly then, this is how far off of the side yard lot line of the neighbor?
It's 1.5, the element that juts out, if you will, from the main portion of the wall is 1.5 feet from what will become the rear yard.
Right, rear yard for the applicant, but it'd be the side yard for the eventual owner of the lot to the east, right? I mean, right now that's the same owner, but eventually there would be another owner there. And then if you look at it from the other view facing west, so from the east facing west, I mean, it's more, to me, it seems more than just a parking pad, certainly more than a driveway. I mean, it's a substantial structure. And so to me, I think one alternative is to sort of lessen that and to have it further off of this rear lot line. And I think it's this view that shows to me that it's a substantial structure, or it's a substantial landscape element. I mean, it's more than just a planter.
So Member Giltner, if I could jump in, Member Podliska asked a question about the parking pad. So if that lot to the east that Mr. Kreibel owns runs as deep as it looks on the map, you're going to end up having to hold 6 feet rather than 2 feet. So the way these parking pads work is if you have a rear yard that abuts somebody else's rear yard, you can go as close as 2 feet to the lot line. But if that rear yard abuts their side, right, kind of abuts the buildable area of their lot, then you'd have to hold 6 feet. And I can't I can't get into the Cook County viewer with the Zoom screen that's up right now, so I can't confirm the depth of that lot to the east. But on the map here, it looks like it runs pretty deep. So where that parking pad is currently located, if we call it a parking pad, to err on the side of caution, you probably want to hold 6 feet rather than 2 on it. If you were going to define it as a spur or a parking pad rather than a patio.
John, you're on mute.
This whole area that's under discussion, is this part of the architecturally significant part of the property? Is this something that Adler added to this property, or is this something that's merely an appendage to the architecturally significant property?
Honestly, I didn't look at the landscape, the history of the landscape to answer that question. I can certainly look that up and determine that. I only know that he did the work on the house itself, but I can certainly look into that history.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, John.
I think that we can preserve the historical significance of this property and still come closer to compliance with the code if we have this patio or whatever we call this structure moved back so that it would be 9 feet from the lot line rather than the 1.5 feet that's being requested.
And I guess I would respond if that's a question, and if not, please stop me. But I certainly think in this instance, given the fact that the structure exists, the structure has existed for decades, and I'm speaking directly to the patio structure for which this variance from the patio setback is sought. I do think that each and every one of the standards applicable to the request for a variance has been satisfied. So I certainly can't deny that we're talking about what's an accessory feature or accessory structure to the house. I certainly don't know if David Adler had any role in designing this particular element of the structure. But I can say that I'm struggling to find other than literal compliance with the code, which is certainly, and I don't mean to diminish the required yard setbacks, but under these circumstances, when we're talking about maintaining that which has existed for decades, and when the ownership of that Woodside property changes and the Craybills decide to sell it, that new owner will purchase that property knowing exactly what they're purchasing and what exists on the adjacent property and where it sits vis-a-vis the setback. So we're not setting up something that will be an imposition on a future property owner. That's something that the future property owner at Woodside will purchase the property understanding what it is that they're purchasing. So I'm struggling to find where within the standards applicable to this request that this particular element is problematic, other than the fact that we're making the request.
Okay.
Any other board members have any questions? I have one follow-up question for Mr. O'Donnell. Perhaps my memory is faulty, and feel free to tell me that it is. But as I recall last month, you had discussed as one of the motivating factors, if not the motivating factor, the fact that the other lots would be sold off. I think there was some mention of estate planning purposes, which is what initially prompted my question regarding special privileges. This evening, it seems that the applicant's motivation seems to have changed from that of spinning off the lots so that other homes could be built on those lots to historic preservation. And I'm wondering if you could explain why the explanation, to my recollection, seems to have changed.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't believe it's changed. What the Craybills are doing, and certainly it's as we say in our application, it's part of making decisions with respect to their property for the future. And the process that was begun by the Craybills in order to donate this preservation easement has begun, and Suzanne, you can correct me, I believe it's been ongoing for more than 2 years. It's been going on a long time. So there is certainly nothing new with that donation being part of estate planning. The decision to preserve the existing structure on lots 7 and 8 is in part driven by the fact that there at some point in the future going to be a new and a different owner. By new and different, I mean other than a Craybill on that property. And they want to not only donate that preservation easement, but they want to set up, if you will, that new property owner with the ability to do what they should do with the historically significant property in a preservation easement. There is recognition for the fact that currently lots 6 and lot 9, and particularly lot 9, while as Dennis pointed out, it has some magnificent use as garden and patio areas. That portion of the property is not entirely necessary going forward in order to accomplish the preservation purposes for the house that sits on lot 7 and 8. So the whole scheme, if you will, is certainly under the auspices of planning for the future, estate planning, if you will. It includes a significant component, and in this particular request, the most significant component of that estate plan is preservation of that structure. The fact that lots 6 and 9, they will exercise their right to separate lots 6 and 9 from the zoning lot is also part of that going forward. But I don't believe in any way, shape, or form is any of this motivated by the ability to create the opportunity to make money off of the sale of buildable lots. And that was the specific question that I was asked to address, and hopefully I did address. But I don't believe anything about the explanation has changed, nor has the emphasis changed. This is under the auspices of significant estate planning, specifically dealing with preserving a structure that has historic significance and also significance personally to the Craybill family.
Any other questions from the board for the applicant? Okay, are there anyone else attending the meeting who would like to address the board on this public hearing?
Yes, I would.
Can you identify yourself for the record, please?
Yes. Good evening. My name is Matt Bousquet, and I own 448 East 4th Street and 445 Woodside, and formerly owned 444 East 4th Street, which contained a Zook home. For geographic perspective, we're located 4 doors down from the subject property.
Matt, can you hold on one second? Kathy, I don't think that Matt got sworn in. Sorry.
I was going to say that. Thank you, Rob. Would you please raise your right hand? You do solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do, thank you.
Okay.
So for geographic perspective, we're located 4 doors down from the subject property. As you know, we underwent a very long and expensive process to try and split our lot and renovate and landmark the Zook house. For those who might not remember or did not know, the reason we ended up in front of this body, the ZBA, in the first place was the Zook home encroached on the second lot by 1.5 feet, which resulted in us not having a second buildable lot, and so we had to come in for a variance. Thus, I note with great sadness and irony that the petitioner was one of a small, well-connected, and very vocal group that objected to our efforts. In fact, it's purported he was one of the participants in the below-market mysterious offer to purchase my lot, which was given to the president of the village instead of me when they overturned unanimously your decision. I guess that established a new standard for such variance requests. The petitioner now seeks a variance and asserts quite similar arguments that he recently opposed when we were seeking our variance. You guys are all smart and dedicated residents who are volunteering your time and brains. I just trust you to make a good and right decision. And it's my hope that the code applies equitably to all residents. Thank you for your time.
Does anyone have any of the board members have any questions for Mr. Bousquet?
No, can I ask Mr. O'Donnell to respond to that, if you're able to? On the behalf of the petitioner?
Well, I'm not certain what the question is. I certainly have very general but not specific familiarity with the issue that was just spoken of, the other issue. But I certainly, if there's any suggestion, and I didn't hear it specifically, but if there is any suggestion that what's being requested here tonight is a request that the board favor one resident over another, or apply the standards applicable to a variance different than has been applied in other circumstances. I'm certainly not going to get into any of the detail that we've gone through, but I certainly don't think that's what's being done in this request. And I certainly do think that the board is going to give due consideration and apply in an even-handed, consistent manner the standards of the code in considering this issue. But I certainly am unaware of any prior circumstance. And what Mr. Craybill or any member of the Craybill family's position was with respect to it. So I can't speak to that. But if the request is for the board to apply the code in an even-handed, consistent manner, I concur.
Any of the board members have any other questions for Mr. O'Donnell, Mr. Bousquet, or anyone else who's presented this evening on this case? I guess I'll make one comment regarding what Mr. Bousquet said. I think it's important for everyone to remember that in Mr. Bousquet's case, this body approved the variance request. Unfortunately, our approval was a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees overruled us in a decision which I thought was wrong, but that's neither here nor there. And so I guess personally, I'm struggling with the idea of applying a different standard to this particular variance request when this body approved Mr. Bousquet's similar request, even though the Board of Trustees later overturned it, and whether the applicant in this case was involved in any way in defeating the Board of Trustees approval is there's no evidence before us on that issue, unfortunately. And so I'm struggling as to how we would take that into consideration. That being said, I think I speak for more than myself in saying that what the Board of Trustees did in Mr. Bousquet's case was tragic in my view, but that's water under the bridge. Any other board members have any comments, questions for anyone who's presented this evening? Tom, you're speaking, but you're muted.
I am new to this, but it seems to me, and I'm also hampered by the fact that I'm a lawyer, but it seems to me that I've heard a lot of discussion in the past meetings about decisions we made, and then this is what the Board of Trustees did, and we sort of take that into consideration, like at the last meeting when we were talking about dividing the lot on on 55th Street. I remember Gary saying, here are the circumstances where we approved it and the Board of Trustees overturned us. I guess I was sort of under the impression that this was a little bit like a lower court and a higher court. And once the appellate court says this is the way it is, then the lower courts follow that. And I guess I'm wondering how that fits here. I mean, if we make decisions and they're overturned by the Board of Trustees, are we or are we not well advised to look at what the Board of Trustees has done in the past in making our decisions? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, this case is a little different in that we have the final decision-making authority in this case, not the Board of Trustees. So, and I guess the answer to your question, Tom, from my perspective is we can certainly take the Board of Trustees opinions in other similar cases into account, but as our outside counsel has advised us many times, we're not bound by any particular precedent in other cases. And in that way, we're not quite like a lower court looking at precedent in other cases from a higher court.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have any other comments or questions before we close the public hearing? Okay, do I hear a motion to close the public hearing, case V-03-21?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Moberly,
Yes.
Member Alicia,
Joe, you're muted.
Sorry, yes.
Member,
Apologize.
that's okay. Member Giltner,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Yes.
Member Lee,
Yes.
Member Podliska,
Yes.
Chairman Neiman,
Yes. Which of the board members would like to begin deliberations in case V-03-21, 505 South County Line Road?
Well, let me say then that I would be in favor of granting this request for a variance. The questions I had about the patio, I think, are satisfied by the unique physical condition requirement that it needs to be met. And as council pointed out, those structures that are close to the lot line have been there for a considerable length of time. And if it was the homeowner's decision to move it back to make their case more persuasive, that's fine, but I don't think it's disqualifying that they want to keep those structures that have been that close to the lot line for this long. I think they've met the various requirements that they need to meet, and I would be in favor of approving the variation.
John, let me ask you a question. Given your suggestion earlier that they could be closer to compliance if they moved that parking deck planter area, whatever we want to call it. There is one of the criteria is that it's a minimum, the variation requested is the minimum needed. How do you, I'd like to hear the board members' thoughts on whether the applicant has, as the variance has been presented, meets that standard that it's the minimum variation. Any thoughts on that, John? I mean, given the size of the lot, I'm not sure in my mind that it matters terribly because this is such a massive lot. On the other hand, your point earlier about couldn't we get it a little closer, I thought was a fair one.
Well, and as a personal matter, I would prefer to see it moved back from the lot line.
Yeah.
I think there may be some issues there because, of course, these setbacks aren't just something that somebody threw a dart against the wall to figure out, let's move it back 10 feet. A lot of people put a lot of thought into this years ago to figure out what's best for the community. In addition to aesthetics, there's safety issues too. If you look at these photographs that have been taken, you've got automobiles sitting there very close to that lot line. We don't know what kind of structures are going to be on the adjoining lot in the future. And we've got a situation where we've got cars that are parked out there that could involve hazards of fire. It could involve hazards of misuse of the automobile that could cause it to go through that wall. But having said all of that, there's a reason why the setback would be preferable. But it is a unique condition that this has been there for such a long time that to say that we've got to bring in the wrecking balls and knock that brick wall down to move it back to get it 9 feet from the lot line instead of 1.5 feet. I think that's an extreme response to the requirement that they request, the minimum that they would need in order to accomplish their purpose.
Thank you.
I hesitate for the zoning board of appeals to start playing landscape architect and construction manager on people's private property. I think that's going beyond our purview. My biggest issue coming into this, which I guess I wasn't aware of or didn't pay attention last month, was I just hate to see something built on lots 6 and 9. I understand more clearly today they have a right to do that. We have no say-so over that, but when they put up the 3-story modern white farmhouse in a few years, or whatever they're going to do on the other side, I just think the village is going to lose something, and it's a shame. I know that there's very few of these really fine estates left in town with significant homes and garages on multiple acres, and it's just it's a dying. It's just a shame that that's going to happen, but it is. The Rand Paul in me says it's the applicant's right to do what they want to with their own property and their own investment. So I guess I would concur with Mr. Podliska's arguments in favor of this.
Keith?
Yeah, I guess I struggle with that parking pad being so close, and I understand that it's maybe not our responsibility to to decide whether or not something is a significant enough to move back or forth, but we are being asked to approve a variance, and I think this is a very unique case. This structure has been there for as long as it has, and without any objection, is because the owner does own the other lot. It's essentially his backyard, and I think if there was another owner in that property, there'd probably be a different conversation right now, and maybe some more objection to it. So, and I know that's not up to us to sort of forecast what that would look like if there was a new owner in there, but I do think that in the spirit of reducing the variance request, I do think that's a remedy that is available to us. I don't know if I'll have the support of the other members to make that a condition, but it is something that I think is reasonable. Otherwise, I'm comfortable with the garage variance, but it's just the fact that this parking pad is so close to the lot line. I think the next owner, if we think about that next owner, I think there would be, that would be very close to their side yard.
Joe?
So I'm thinking Keith has a camera in my house or audio, because I was thinking the exact same things. I'll just repeat what he says. I'm in favor, Keith, of supporting you on making that a condition. The only thing I would add is I don't know, maybe it's my professional history, but I just find it hard to believe that at least a part of this isn't being done for estate planning purposes to maximize the financial value. So I just don't believe council's statement that that's not the case. Be that as it may, like I said, I'll agree with Keith and the other members in support of these variances with that condition if we have enough support for it.
And Keith, for my benefit, could you restate the condition that you're proposing?
Well, I haven't really looked at sort of what the exact setback would be, and maybe that would be something that we would ask someone to sort of put a proposed plan together. But I guess to make the lot line, the setback to be more consistent with, I think John, you'd mentioned, I think it was about 9 feet of a setback. If you extended
I think that's the number that we were given, correct?
Or maybe it was 8.5. I mean, I'd have to see the actual, the specifics of how far that juts out, but.
Well, yeah, I think it is. Right now, it's 1.5 feet. If we took we could move it back. If we remove that patio portion, we would move it back to be 9 feet from the lot line. So there would be an additional 7.5 feet of movement.
8.9 feet, and like 8 feet 10 inches instead of 9 feet. And that still works with some other planter lines and structure lines and things. That would be the best number for us. 8'10".
Okay.
Leslie?
Yes, I agree with most of what Joe and Keith said. I don't have any issues with the garage, but I do feel that what's on the side of the property there is a bit imposing, given that, like we've said, at some point in the future, there will likely be a house on lot 6. So I agree with, the stipulation that's being suggested. And the one thing I have a hard time wrapping my head around is the response to the self-creation. I feel like if we weren't talking about separating the lots and what's going to happen with those in the future, which is obviously, driven by the current homeowner, I guess I have a hard time understanding how this isn't self-created. But I think, like I said, the garage seems to be a reasonable request, but I think if we could do something to create a little bit more of a buffer in the future for whoever might be moving into lot 6, I think it would be a good thing, a prudent thing to do for those property owners.
Tom?
I hear the arguments and I would, vote. I think I would vote for the variance without a request to make those alterations, though. The garage imposes a lot more if you look at just the number, and it just seems to me when you're talking about the minimum, asking only for the minimum, that makes a lot of sense when you're building something and don't go farther than you need. I remember a lot of angst on the very small lot that was over along 83, where it was just really hard to design a house, and I don't remember exactly what they were asking for, but it was really hard to see how they could ask for less and still build a house. When it's existing, when it's already there, it seems to me that they're asking the minimum because that's what they have to ask for in order not to tear it all apart. So I would be, I think, in favor. I'd be in favor if the consensus is we need to move it, but I'd also be in favor of approving it without making that a condition.
Yeah, I think I generally feel the same way as Tom. Whomever said earlier that if there was a neighbor living on these other lots already, we'd be having a very different discussion, and we'd be perhaps more inclined to require that the applicant come closer to the minimum standard. But given the size of this lot and the historical value of the home, I'm not sure that it makes a huge difference to me. And as I said earlier, Mr. Busquets' points, while understandable, I can't get over the idea that given that that the zoning board approved Mr. Busquets' similar request, that we'd be doing something unusual in this case. And Mr. Busquets' comment that the applicant was opposed to his variance request and may have been behind the phantom bid that led the Board of Trustees to reverse us. That sounded very much like hearsay to me, and therefore I don't think we can consider it. And I'm not sure hypocrisy is disqualifying standard anyway. I guess, Mr. O'Donnell, given what you've heard, that there seems to be at least some consensus, I'm not sure it's a majority consensus or not, about putting some restrictions on the variance request as it was presented. Well, we would have to reopen the hearing, I guess, to have Mr. O'Donnell address that, or Mr. Parsons. Mr. O'Donnell, Mr. Parsons, do you have a desire to address what you've heard?
I don't know that it's really necessary, but I certainly could address, and what I have in mind is could address if there's a desire that I do, and Mr. Parsons as well, okay. The suggestion that that the variance request as it pertains to the 10-foot rear yard setback for the patio or parking pad or whatever it's designated as, that request be either accompanied by a condition that the variance request be reduced from 8.5 feet to some other number. I certainly could address that. I think, and I guess I won't say more until I'm given permission to address that issue and the public hearing is reopened.
Thank you. So let's, maybe the best way to approach this is to go around the 7 board members quickly and see how many want a condition placed on this variance and how many would be okay without a condition.
Before we do that, Bob, if I might just maybe respond to what Leslie was addressing, that if we had a homeowner, if we had a property owner on this property now, the discussion might be a little bit different. And my thought on that is that when the day comes that property to the east is sold off, it might well be a matter of negotiation between a potential buyer of that property and the owners on this property. If they're trying to sell that property off, they may need to negotiate with a potential buyer about where this patio wall is and how close it is to the property line. It could well reflect upon the price that they're able to get when they try to sell that property. And it might be something that would be best resolved between the buyer and the seller at that time, rather than something that we need to place as a condition before we address this variance.
I think that's a good point. I think that is exactly how it would work out. If this is diminishing the value of that other property, it's going to be reflected. And if it's better, if the overall value is higher by getting rid of that and moving it back, that's what the market should drive to.
In other words, what's concerning us is going to concern a potential buyer of that property, and that's going to get reflected in negotiations over how much that property is worth.
And we're addressing it hypothetically, and they're going to be addressing it, realistically, based on what they plan to do with the lot.
Right.
Okay, so it sounds like both Tom and John would be okay without approving the variance without any conditions. Is that accurate, guys?
Yes.
Okay, Keith?
Yeah, I still think there's rationale for having a condition to minimize the variance request. This is a very unique situation. I know typically we do allow variances like this when, everything is sort of stays the same, but this isn't like, for example, this isn't like the case we had last month on Elm Street. So, for that reason, I do think it's be appropriate to have a condition to move what looks to be about 1.5 feet off of the lot line, that structure to be closer to the 10 feet that would be required.
Okay, and Leslie and Joe, it seemed to me from your prior comments that you agreed with Keith that there should be a condition. If we were to vote now, you would want it with a condition. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, that's right. I just feel like that, whatever it is, 4-foot brick wall structure that starts that parking pad or patio, it's just a bit imposing for being that close to the lot line.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I want to change my vote. After hearing the arguments from Keith and the others, I kind of am still reluctant to get involved with micromanaging, but I think there are some sound arguments for approving this with the conditions.
With conditions. Okay, so that's 4 members that seem to be leaning to approving this with the condition. It seems to me appropriate as a result to see, given Mr. O'Donnell, given his comments a few minutes ago saying he could address the idea of a condition if we were to reopen the hearing. It seems to me appropriate that if we are going to make an educated decision, that we hear from Mr. O'Donnell on that issue. So is there a motion to reopen the public hearing in case V-03-21?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Moberly,
Yes.
Member Alicia,
Yes.
Member Giltner,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Yes.
Member Lee,
Yes.
Member Pudliska,
Yes.
Chairman Neiman.
Yes. Mr. O'Donnell, Mr. Parsons, if you could address the idea of the condition briefly.
Sure. And the portion that I wanted to address is, if we keep in mind the condition that will be recorded, is the owner of the future owner of the Woodside property would have the opportunity to cause the stairs to be removed. And the reason I mention that is because there was a comment by Board Member Lee that the brick structure is imposing, and certainly it is a structure. It is a brick structure, and the face of it is certainly visible and obvious to the adjacent property owner. But as it presently exists, it's certainly softened by the fact that we have the landscape stairs leading down to that Woodside property. When the time comes for that property to be sold, and the new owner of the Woodside property to determine what they want to do with that element, meaning the stairs, they're going to have the opportunity to address that wall. So the comment that was made earlier is that the buyer and the seller will address the issue specifically when that property is sold. I think there's no doubt that that's going to occur, given the condition that's going to be recorded in the decision that's going to be made, and presumably as part of the negotiation for the sale of that property with respect specifically to the stairs. But when one takes into account removing the stairs, then the wall is left. So is the wall enhanced to make it a solid wall across without, an element leading down to the stairs? Is it going to be removed? Is it going to remain as it exists? I would suggest, as the comment was made earlier, that that's something that really ought to be left to the future property owners of both properties. As to the condition of really pulling the wall back, if you will, it sounds like it would be approximately 7 or 8 feet. Dennis, you would have the measurement more specific than I. The only hesitation that I have is I don't know structurally what exists under there. In other words, I don't know if there's any stormwater drainage facility underneath the driveway or the patio in that area. So I don't know the significance of pulling back that wall. And I think that would be relevant to determine the appropriateness of imposing that condition. Because as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it really isn't a condition. What it sounds as if it would be is simply a denial of the request to allow a variance for that patio. And then at whatever point in time our side yard becomes our rear yard, that element is going to have to be removed from its current, or what will then exist as an encroachment. So I guess I'm a little bit confused by the reference to condition. It sounds more like if you will, a flat out denial, and then the issue will have to be addressed by the owner at the appropriate time. Dennis?
The dimensions off the survey is at the north end, it's 8 feet, 8.9 feet. At the south side, it's 9.3. So I suppose you could say an average, you would rebuild the new wall an average of 9 feet off the property line. But I just want to point out that 2/3 of that area is landscaping. It's not paved. It's a planting bed. And it's also, the masonry is in excellent shape. There's no stress cracks. There's no tuck pointing required. And I would just like to, in my opinion, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And I don't think there's any harm in leaving those walls where they're at. And I don't think anyone will be any less the better by leaving it just alone, leaving it the way it has always been. And that's all I can add.
Anyone else wish to address the board now that the hearing has been reopened?
Yes, I do. This is Mr. Bousquet. Just for 3 quick points of clarity. One, and I know Rob has a copy of it. It's dated August 30th, 2017 from 444 Zook Partners LLC to Thomas Cawley, and it's the cover letter for the offer for my home that went to the president. And in it itself, it says specifically, this group includes Fred Crable, who has pledged his support to our cause. So just for clarity, it isn't some spooky behind the curtains thing. It was on the front page of the offer that went to the Board of Trustees and the president. Second, I'm wildly supportive of your guys' efforts. And frankly, I'm supportive of granting the variance. Under the cause of being a hypocrite is no reason not to do the right thing. So I just want it to be clear that it's unbelievably unfortunate that this gentleman allowed a Zook house to be torn down, and I'd like to not see his house get torn down as well. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to address the board now that the hearing has been reopened? Okay, do I hear a motion to close the public hearing again in case V-03-21505 South County Line Road?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Moberly,
Yes.
Member Alicia,
Yes.
Member Giltner,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Yes.
Member Lee,
Yes.
Member Pudliska,
Yes.
Chairman Neiman.
Yes. Okay, given what we've just heard, it seems to me that, we could either entertain a motion to grant the variance outright. We could entertain a motion to grant the variance with the condition that we've discussed, or we could entertain a motion to deny the variance request. Seems to me, from what I've heard, it's one of the first two options, but I'm not sure which.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Would another option be to extend the public hearing so that there could be some specifics drawn up on what it could look like? If there's support for that?
That's certainly something we could, yes, that's certainly something we could request. There's no requirement, as I understand it, that we decide the issue this evening. If we require more information, then we could ask for it. Rob, is that correct?
Certainly. And Chairman, if I might offer one comment, Dennis had commented that at the north end, it was about 8.3, and that would be to the corner of what we would all agree is the parking pad, right?
Can we show just
8 foot, it's 8.9 feet to the west side of the planting bed on the north side.
8.9.
Yeah, and on the south side, it's 9.3 feet to the west side of the planting bed. So a good number to relocate this wall, if that was your decision, would be 9 feet. That would allow us to keep that stone walk around back to the back part of the property.
Well, and that's just what I was thinking. And if that wall's cut flush with that existing walk, and we can certainly all agree that it's a parking pad. And if it's a parking pad, it can be as close as 6, even if you abutted the side yard to the property on Woodside, and you wouldn't need any relief for that at all then. Right? Because then there's no argument that it's no longer a patio. It's just a thought.
Yeah, well, 6 feet is better than 9 feet. But I think it's going to be, we're going to have to salvage brick and everything else to make all this look right. And I don't know that, I don't know if that's, I don't want to speak for Fred.
And I don't know what's under it either.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a suggestion?
Please.
It sounds as if that maybe more information with respect to this patio, parking pad, driveway, drive court might be helpful to the board before making a decision. So what I would suggest, if appropriate, is that a vote be taken with respect to the request for the variance from the rear yard setback for the garage. And then if indeed additional information would be helpful to the board, that that matter attendant only to the request for the variance for the patio be continued to another hearing.
Could the other board members react to that suggestion? That sound reasonable, Keith?
It sounds reasonable. I mean, I would support it. I just don't know if it's necessary, but if others have a different opinion, I'm fine.
Gary?
I don't have an opinion. I'm hungry. A hungry mind says no.
I don't have a problem with bifurcating it.
Okay, Joe?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Leslie?
Okay by me.
Tom?
Yep, it's fine with me.
Okay. For whatever it's worth, I mean, well, it looks like we're heading towards a motion to grant the variance regarding the garage and ask for further information next month on the patio. I'll now express my gut reaction after all is said and done. I tend to lean towards a preservationist mentality. And it seems to me that the idea of moving the wall to get it a little closer and, not need such a large variance request on a lot this size seems like a whole lot of work, and tearing down something of some historical significance for not all that much gain is my gut. But that being said, would someone like to make a motion to, I guess it would be to grant the variance regarding the garage and request more information on the patio issue? Is that right? John?
Well, I think we would be voting to reopen the hearing as to the patio issue and then ask for additional information, correct? So we're voting to reopen as to the patio, and we can take a vote on the request for the variation for the garage.
Yes. Yes, I think that's right. And reopen next month, though, right? So Gary can eat, for God's sake.
I think we really want to just move to continue that portion of the hearing because we wouldn't leave it sitting open. We always close them. So we will, yeah.
Okay.
Who wants to make that motion?
Motion to approve the variance as to the request as to the garage. Move to continue the hearing as to the request for the variation for the patio.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Moberly,
Yes.
Member Alicia,
Yes.
Member Giltner,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Yes.
Member Lee,
Yes.
Member Podliska,
Yes.
Chairman Neiman.
Yes. We will see you next month. Thank you for all of your help.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's your time.
Next matter on our agenda, does anyone have any new business? Anyone have any old business? Do I hear a motion to adjourn to allow Mr. Moberly to eat dinner?
Oh, so moved.
So moved.
Only if he invites us over.
No, there's nothing here, believe me.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Moberly,
Yes.
Member Alicia,
Yes.
Member Giltner,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Yes.
Member Lee,
Yes.
Member Podliska,
Yes.
Chairman Neiman.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Stay well. See you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.